To thank the elders and the congregation for giving me this opportunity. If you do not know, I'm a teacher at Pizitz Middle School. I have been for 2 years, and I've been thankful to see a couple kids over the years that go to this congregation every single day. So if you didn't know, life in middle school is very busy. A lot changes. The kids become more independent. They hit puberty, or puberty hits them. And they make decisions that don't make any sense. In thinking about this sermon, I didn't really know what to talk about. So today we're going to be talking about wisdom in Ecclesiastes. So the preacher in Ecclesiastes we will soon meet is Solomon. As you turn there to chapter 7, we see in chapter 1 that it says the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And then in chapter 1, verse 12, it says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. So, popular belief, it is Solomon. And as we know throughout the Bible, Solomon has immense wisdom and has been a gift from God. It is noted in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29. It says, And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand on the seashore. When I think of sand on the seashore, I immediately think of two things. First, in Genesis 22:17 of Abraham's descendants, and then also in Psalms 139:17, that's talking about when God is talking about his all-knowing power to David. Solomon in 1 Kings asked for understanding and discernment to the Lord to lead the nation that was entrusted to him. He did not ask for immense money, he asked for wisdom. And this is something that we can learn from. Through Solomon's life, he showed that wisdom does not block us from sinning and going the wrong path. And we see this multiple times. Solomon even made decisions that were warned of him not to make. And as he progressed from being king, he focused more on wives and wealth than the wisdom that he got from God. And this turned him to worship pagan gods. He had all this wisdom, but he did not use it. Solomon's downfalls have given us important lessons to take away. He has even shown us that all this wisdom cannot stop us from human nature. If we look in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, it says, Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. King Solomon uses Ecclesiastes to account for his own life pursuits. We will look specifically in chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes, and this will be our focal point for our lesson today. As you're in chapter 7, Solomon does a natural split of the chapter between right after verse 14. So verse 1 to 14 is one section, and 15 to 29 is the other. As we begin in chapter 7, verse 1, we see that the focus is more on how difficult situations have value to us than the easy ones. The preacher, also Solomon, wants us to understand the values of hard times than yearning for the pleasant of life that's easy. So let's look in verse 1 of chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. So our name follows us forever. Even when we're married, women, you still have the last name that you were given to in birth, and that is your family name. In Solomon's case, his name was known for wisdom and money throughout all the land. But we also saw the opposite of this. So we can build up our reputation, but one single mistake can have it come falling down. Money can be earned, but our reputation to repair is almost impossible. As we begin in verse 1, if you look back at chapter 6 and verse 12, it says, For who knows what is good for man in life? All the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow, who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? This leaves a tone in chapter 6 of sadness and the thought in chapter 7 of death being better than one's birth. But when we think of a child, we think of something that is perfect, unblemished by society, and something that we can learn by and live by throughout the Bible. But when we're talking about Solomon, he wants us to have the value of death over the day of birth. And how does that make any sense? Well, let's look in verse 2 and 3. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Verse 3. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. So we see a stark difference in these verses. The house of mourning, as we know, is serious. In the house of feasting, we think of a party and no thought of tomorrow. With a preacher having wisdom on both of these ideas, he learned from what he gained and stops us from awaiting on the fool that only lives in the moment. As humans, we know that death is everyone, and we cannot escape it. And keeping that in mind, we have to teach, learn, and live by the truth every single day. We do not know when our time comes, but we have to be ready for that day. There are things that God can only teach us through sorrow and not through laughter. Yes, we enjoy having fun and relaxing, but our focus needs to be on the goal after this life. Look with me in verse 4. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So this is double stated, as I like to say, and that means that it means really a lot to Solomon for him to say this multiple times. So this is more of a warning that the wise are continuously checking on themselves and seeing where we are in this life, while the fools just go out, live every single day as just another day. But we need to not fall into this trap. And when you look every single day, look into the Word and see where we are in life. In Psalm 103, 15-16, it says, As for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. For the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. So we do not know when this life will end for us, and we can live it two different ways, in which we will see in the next verses. But we need to think about, if our life ends today, how are we going to be remembered by it? Verse 5 and 6, it reads, It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. So being rebuked is never fun. Criticism is in our human nature to accept it all the time. But the people that care about us and give structured criticism, they want us to do what's right. So this will come with the correction of parents, family, friends, and the wise that are in our life and around us. The fools, however, are the peer pressure that we see in life. As being a one-year social studies teacher, in the ancient times, the crackling of thorns that they used was more that it's fast burning. So comparing that to the laughter of a fool, it is only for a second. So people may resent you for how you act and how you are, but that only lasts for a little bit. And if we have God on our side and we look to him, we know that we have greater goals to strive upon than to worry about what other people say about us. Verse 7, Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. So this is a warning that even a wise man, as Solomon was, can be a fool by oppression around him. So he was affected by those based on thinking physically and not on spiritually. This is the same representation of a bribe. We may be set and be correct in one way, but accepting a bribe may be good for us and money-wise, but we could be supporting of something evil. So our corrupt heart can get in the way of our stances. In verse 8, it reads, "The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit." So here is just a little verse on patience. And the preacher knows that the beginning may come quick, but the end may come a little bit later. And in working in a middle school, there's a lot of drama, a lot of things that are being said. And if I acted on every single one, I would not have time to teach. So in thinking that, and how I've learned, when you get presented an idea, you have to get all the facts. I know we have a lot of lawyers, businessmen in the room. And if you just acted on the first thing that you saw, you probably wouldn't be so successful. So we must wait to hear everything before responding to this situation. If we rush to respond, that is one that is inexperienced, and repercussions will follow for acting so fast. As we look into verse 9, it says, "Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools." So the opposite of patience, as seen in the verse before, is anger. And we've been warned this many times in the Bible. An example is in James 1:19. It says, "So then, my brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." When we act in anger, we're not using the wisdom that God has given us. We are acting as fools. In verse 10, "Do not say, 'Why were the former days better than these?' For you do not inquire wisely concerning this." So when you think better days, I'm 23, so I think about being under my parents' care. I would go to school, go to sports, come home, eat, then sleep. I did not have many big decisions throughout the day. Maybe studying, that's pretty much the only thing. But now, as I am older, there's a lot of different decisions that you have to make every single day that can either directly affect your day or week or even year. And yes, life is difficult, but in our human nature, we aspire to advance in life from where we are. So through these hard and difficult times, they're good for you and me. And they're ultimately much better than the easy way in life. Because over time, as we have difficult situations, the easy times feel so much better. This goal that we're searching for is in the midst of the difficulty that we weren't exposed as a younger child. We were nurtured and cared for, and for parents, we were taught the right things to be prepared for these situations in life. In verse 11 and 12, "Wisdom is good for an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it." So both wisdom and money can be helpful, but wisdom can save our life. In this world, there are many different pleasures, and we have to have money to survive. But God provides for our needs, and the way we think and use the money is where we have our wisdom. We can't get caught up in the emptiness of pursuing wealth. Solomon did, and he is warning us. So he acknowledged that himself, that even he did this, and he failed. Verses 13 and 14. "Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him." So God's given us 2 different days. We have adversity and we have prosperity. We can rejoice when things are abundant because we know it comes from him. But you know what also comes from him? Difficulty. And just remember that God has made both for us. The reason he's made both is so that no one knows what is coming next. And I think the idea here is that if we live merely under the sun, just thinking everything's going to be good, and that we will be hit by difficult times. We cannot change easy times to hard times, or hard times to easy, and we have to know who has the power to do so. If we were the fool may dwell on this and say, what could be, or might have been. But the wise person trusts in the sovereign power of God and thanks him for what it is. So at the beginning of my lesson, I said that verses 1 to 14 is one section, and we're moving on to verse 15. So in verse 15, there is a shift, and this shift is more of how difficult situations have more value to us. We see the contradiction of the law of retaliation or retribution. So if you do not know the law of retribution, we see it in Exodus 21:24, giving an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This means that it is proportional for what we do with our actions. But in verse 15, we see that this is quite the opposite. I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. While following this law of retaliation, it would seem that in a perfect world, the righteous man lives the longest, and the wicked man lives the least amount of time. But that is not correct in our world that we live in. Sometimes it is the case, and it works that way, but we cannot think that that will happen. The man who does right dies young, and the man who is evil could live a long time. But there's two different people here, the wise and the fool. The wise person understands the proper perspective of living in fear every single day for the Lord. Obeying his commands out of love, not duty, and trusting that God will protect and sustain our physical lives according to his own sovereign time. A wise person in this aspect lives with grace and humility. So let's look at verse 16. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? So this is not talking about the righteousness that is credited to one's promise, God's promise, like Abraham did in regarding God's promise of a descendant or the New Testament Christians for forgiveness and eternal life in Christ. I think that this is more about right and wise living. The emphasis is having a long life. That's what we saw in the previous verse, that the emphasis is prolonging one's life. So in light of that, if you really try hard to make yourself righteous and wise so that you have a long life, you may be disappointed and die early. So do not waste your life on trying to prolong your life. It might not work. So if we shift to verse 17, do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? So this is quite the opposite of verse 16. So 16, we are righteous, but verse 17, we are wicked and foolish. So even if your life does not go long as being a righteous person, do not think that of being a foolish. So do not be foolish or evil. Your actions may prematurely end your life. Yes, you might prolong your life, but you are living it for the wrong reason if you're trying to live longer. The preacher said that he's seen this happen. In comparing verse 16 and 17, we do not know what tomorrow will bring. Chapter 27, verse 1 of Proverbs. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. We need to live our life for God and not try to prolong it, because we do not know what each day brings. Verse 18. It is good that you grasp this, and also not remove your hand from the other. For he who fears God will escape them all. So Solomon says in verse 16 and 17 that do not try to go out of your way and make big efforts to prolong your life. You need to try to find the best way to live, and that is by the word. Following the Lord's instructions gives us comfort. We have a healthy fear as a father to son of our God, to live our life for him as he will take care of us. And it is always on his time. Verses 19 to 22 will be read together. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. For there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Also do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. So as Robert said in our class this morning, and the eulogy, that no one is sinless, and we must remember that everyone will at some point sin, and it will happen many, many times. As we live our lives, it will be said toward us and about us things that we may not like. And we have learned before that anger is for fools. So we have to keep in mind that throughout this world, we may be confronted with different challenges and hurdles, and someone talking bad about us is not something that we need to worry about, because we need to look at the goal that we are aiming for. And it does say in verse 22 that even you have cursed others. So realize that no one is totally just, even you, and without sin under the sun. Looking at verses 23 to 25. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to trust and seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. So as the preacher Solomon gives wise advice for living, he understands that his desire was not fulfilled with always true wisdom. It seems to be Solomon's attempt to communicate his efforts in trying to understand everything underneath the sun. But we need to know that that should not be our complete focus in this world. 26 through 28. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Here is what I have found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. So right here, this is speaking of the evil, adulterous, seductive woman. He's found maybe one righteous man in 1,000, yet he has found no righteous women. So acknowledging our sin is the first step toward repentance and salvation. The wise person realizes that we are just flesh and sins on this earth. A fool will never come to God because they don't want to acknowledge his or her own sin. So the wise person gives up the false idea that he has anything to offer God and casts himself on God's immense mercy and grace. So Solomon in here is an interesting fact in what he's talking about, because as we said in 1 Kings 11:4, even his own wives turned his heart away to other gods. Solomon, throughout chapter 7, we've seen that he uses this to go through his wisdom and the mistakes that even he made himself. He says, in just a chapter over, Ecclesiastes 9:9. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun. This makes me think about how much Solomon's life would have been changed if he found a woman like that of the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31, who would bring him closer to God and uphold him. Solomon is known to be a wise king, even though he has made many, many mistakes, as so have you and I. In wrapping up, the last verse, verse 29, truly, this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So this, unfortunately, is why we need wisdom in our life and with dealing with unjust people. And sadly, almost everyone is this way. In this case, in spite of God originally creating his man upright, we've all sought evil schemes. So in wrapping up this lesson today, we need to think of different things, lessons that Solomon has given us. So the first one is that we do need to enjoy good things that God has given to us. He gives and he takes. We need to know that we have to submit to his sovereignty. God's time is not our time, even when we try to believe otherwise. Even when we have difficult times in this life, it is a test of what we do. We have to remember that the contradictions to the law of retribution is still in play. We may see others who are living a not so good life, but they may live longer, they may be prosper. But this is not our home. And we have to deal wisely with the unjust. Not everyone has the opportunity to come every Sunday to church. We have to keep in mind that we are able to help those that are living an unjust life. I want to thank the opportunity for this to preach to you guys. And if you have any comments or questions that you would like to talk about of what's been said, please come and talk to me as we can study together. If you want to be baptized in the waters to be a child of God in accordance with his word, or if you need support or help, please come up front while we stand and sing.